What we're going to take a look at here is problems related to the family. And obviously, one of the major problems is divorce. It tends to be much more of an issue today than it was years ago. Many reasons for this. A lot of it has to do with the social acceptance of divorce today. People are much more apt to take that option, whereas years ago it was kind of shunned upon. The other thing is the opportunity for serial monogamy. The idea that nowadays a lot of people who get divorced are ending up remarrying. We'll talk about that here in just a minute. And a lot more growing worldwide acceptance. This is not the trend that's going on in the United States is not just in the U.S. It's throughout the world. Divorce laws have also become made it a lot easier anyway for people to get divorces, and females. The whole idea that years ago. Females kind of felt entrapped in marriages, even if it was a bad marriage. They didn't want to get a divorce because they were afraid, not knowing what was going to happen to them afterward. They didn't have an educational background. They didn't know what to do in the workforce. And so a lot of women felt trapped and ended up staying in marriages that were really not good marriages. Nowadays, females are much more independent and don't really worry as much about the option of divorce. Now, statistics, who tends to get divorced? What are the do's and don'ts in terms of getting married to try and ward off a possible divorce in the future? Well, teenagers. Teenagers who get married are obviously much more likely to end in divorce. Now, it's not a guarantee by any stretch, but the percentages are much higher for teenagers who get married to end up in divorce at some point in time. People who are college educated tend to be less likely to end in divorce. Again, I mentioned a second ago that we'd talk about this. Of the people who do get divorced, you would think that, okay, got burnt on one episode, don't want to try that again. But in reality, 63% of all divorcees end up remarrying, and men are more likely to remarry than women are. So it's maybe different than what you might have expected. 60% of those remarriages, actually it's a little over 60%, will actually end in divorce as well. You would think that maybe a second marriage or a third marriage might end up, the people might be more inclined to stay together. Actually, that's not true. Second divorces are more likely to end in, second marriages rather, are more likely to end in divorce than first marriages, and third marriages are more likely than second marriages. So, let's talk about adjustments after divorce. There is a big difference in the first thing that men and women think about when they think about the potential of a divorce. When a divorce first gets mentioned, and the couple is initially considering the option, the first thing women tend to think about are the relationships. How is this going to impact the relationship between her and her husband, between her and her children, between the children and the husband? How is all that going to take place? So that's the first thing that females tend to think about. Men, on the other hand, hate to admit this, but the first thing that men tend to think about is, how much is this going to cost me? They think about the money. How expensive is it going to be to go through a divorce? What kind of payments are going to take place, and things of that nature? So, in that regard, is it any wonder that after a divorce, both women and men's income fall, but men tend not to be hurt economically as bad as women? Okay, in fact, we'll talk about this again later. Single parent households with women are much more likely to, result in poverty and things like that. But women's income decreases much more so than men's. Now, kind of interesting, again, going back to the first thing you think about, females tend to think about the emotional attachments and so forth, and the relationships. Women tend to make better emotional adjustments after a divorce. They seem to be immune to a lot of the issues, the emotional issues that occur after a divorce. And statistics pan this out. Divorced men, actually are 4 times more likely than divorced women to attempt a suicide. Men struggle making the emotional adjustments. Now, single parent families. Okay, when we talk about divorce, obviously that results in a lot of single parent families, much more so than we've ever had before in our history, throughout our history. For the first time ever in United States history, just a year or two ago, married couple households actually made up less than half of the households in America, according to the Census Bureau. So that is the first time that has ever happened, that married couple households made up less than 50%. As I mentioned a while ago, the stigma of divorce has been reduced, and the stigma of being a single parent has been reduced. Now, how does this impact different races or ethnicities? You can see the statistics. 17% of Asian families, 28% of white families are single parent families, 38% of Hispanics, and a whopping 63% of black families are single parent families. Either situations where the parents have gotten a divorce, or a situation where, in many of these cases that we've talked about, the parents never got married to begin with. So, approximately 80% of single parent families are headed by women, and over a fourth of those women live in poverty with their children. Single parent fathers, not nearly as frequent as you see single parent females, but single parent fathers also suffer, again, kind of from an emotional isolation. There's not as many single parent dads. So, in terms of opportunities within society, to get out, to get involved, to have like a get together of all kinds of single parent, people and stuff, they tend to be much more isolated emotionally and relationship wise. Divorce does tend to be a cyclical problem. Kids of divorce are much more likely when they get older to actually divorce in their own marriages, especially in situations where the marriage takes place and both spouses come from divorced families in the past. There's a number of possible reasons for this. Maybe it's due in part to the idea that these kids never learned how to make adjustments within a marriage. If a fight took place or what have you, they never realized, they never saw their own parents being able to fix things, being able to resolve issues. And so maybe that's part of it. And then it might be due in part to simply the idea that in the back of their mind, even though marriage has that part that says till death do us part, they realize that marriages can end in divorce, and it's a realistic option for them. So maybe they're more likely to, go quicker to that action of taking a divorce than kids who grow up in two-parent households. All right, let's stop at that point.